Hey everybody, and welcome to a fresh episode of Level Design Breakdown. And in today's video, actually, let's have a recap, quick recap. The previous video, what we did was we used a level design kit and we created the level that we'll be focusing on. In today's video, we'll be creating the actual graphics, or at least we'll be starting on the graphics that will be used in the game itself. However, I also want to cover a few key points when it comes to creating those graphics. And the first point is modularity versus or over modularity. There's a very fine line between modularity and over modularity, and I'll be touching on that in the video itself. And the second point, and this is the only other point that I'll be making today, is using sorting layers or rendering layers and how they're important for when you're making a 2D game. Now, the screen is going to fade to black, but when we return, we'll be in Photoshop, actually, and we'll be creating our sprite sheet. I was going to say texture sheet, but lucky I stopped myself and said sprite sheet instead. So, let's get on with it. Okay, so now we're in Photoshop, and I just created a 128 by 128 pixel square, but the base unit, my base unit of measurement is 32 pixels, because if you've been watching the previous videos, that's essentially what the units of measurement are for this mini-series on 2D level design. And the focus of this is, of course, for this video anyway, is all about modularity and avoiding over modularity. And later on, it's going to be about sorting layers. So for now, let's talk about a little bit about modularity and the importance of it. If you watched the previous video, you would have noticed that I use a lot of pieces. For this, my focus was to use as few pieces as possible. So while I'm creating, while my base unit of measurement is 32 pixels, I just decided to create a base texture size of 128, which is 4 units across. And I figured that out, and I decided we'll go with that since that's probably as wide as a wall would be in terms of standard wall width. But I do have to take into account that there might be instances where I would need only 32 pixels, so a single unit. And that's where over modularity can become a problem when you sort of start making wall pieces that are even smaller than your base unit. That's where you start to need to think, well, hang on, what exactly do I need this particular sprite sheet for? Can I simply use another sprite sheet and combine it with other sprites of similar size? That's what you need to take into account when you're creating your sprite sheet. For the final presentation anyway. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a I just finished creating a wall texture, and if you noticed, I was fiddling around a lot because I wanted to do, originally the plan was to create the anime style, sort of simple textures, your Mega Man style textures, not textures, sprites. But then I decided, let's go with something that I haven't done before. And then I went back to the whole Mega Man style textures anyway, because it's a style that I'm more confident with, that I know how to sort of use well. So I'm not using any particularly interesting blend layers. I'm just changing the opacity so that I can change the intensity of the highlights. Later on, in a later video, we'll be going through lighting and shadows using a separate sprite sheet. This method was suggested to me by a colleague of mine who has actually used Unity 2D, since that's where we're making our level for, well, since 4.3. Actually, they'd been using it since before 4.3. They're just really smart. So again, with this bit, I tried to go back to that whole other kind of pixel style. I don't even know what it's called. It's just I just tried to do something different, but I figured it's probably not the best idea. So obviously with the chunky Mega Man style um, pixel graphics, you want to have sharp highlights and really deep shadow, not really deep shadows, but you want to be able to tell what's what. And that's what that black layer is for, is so that I can tell what layer is what. Okay, this bit, I actually, the theme for the level is a hospital theme, so I was thinking, well, let's take a look at some reference images. And I was on Google Images doing a lot of reference, I was looking up a lot of reference, and I found in those reference images two dominant wall trims, and that was the timber wall trim, which is what I just created before, and I also noticed a vinyl, I think it's vinyl or linoleum at least, sort of wall trim. Could be linoleum because it's way too, well, it's not as shiny as vinyl, and vinyl is expensive if I remember it correctly. So this is that other wall trim that I decided to create. And essentially with this one, because the shadow, the lighting fall off isn't as sharp, we need to sort of make it a gradient. But unlike using a gradient tool, which you never do in pixel art, yeah, don't use the gradient tool because it doesn't give that sort of chunky pixel art look feel to it. It looks very much like it was painterly, and obviously it depends on the kind of look and feel that you're going for, but if you're going for that retro feel, which is what I'm aiming for in this case, you want to do everything by hand, or at least try to do everything by hand. I'm just expanding that wood trim because as it currently is, it's too thin. And so all I did was just expand it so that I could add in more shadows, more highlights, and from a distance you'll be able to read it. That's why I'm always zooming out. Now, when it comes to modularity, you want to take into account the size of the walls. So I know I've already covered this, but I do feel that I need to reiterate. My base wall, my base unit of measurement, sorry, is 32 by 32, and the height of the walls in my scene is 4 units tall. So what I end up doing is I actually end up creating a wall piece that's 4 units across and only 2 units tall, and that's because later on you'll see it. I actually have a piece where I include some shadow gradient from the ceiling, but that comes in a later part of the video. This bit I actually wanted to create just some wall decoration, but I honestly did not know what I was doing for this. I was just trying to fill space at this point because I felt that it was done, but I completely ignored the fact that the ceilings should have a trim as well. I know most hospitals wouldn't have that, but just for the purposes of aesthetics, it was something that was needed. So I completely get rid of that. I'll show you, it should be coming up soon. The shadow trim should be coming up. Yeah, when you're working with pixel graphics, whatever program you use, if I'm not mistaken, you should be, wait, no, you should be exporting to BMP. That's just how it is. So this piece here is the actual piece that will connect to the ceiling, and even though we'll be in a later video, not later part of this video, it's not going to be this video, it's going to be in a future video, but in that next video it's going to be all about using sprites to simulate lighting and shadows, suggested to me by a colleague of mine, since they've been working in pixel art in Unity pixel art since before 4.3. So this is quite interesting that they've now that 4.3 well 4.5, well, video is actually made in 4.5, but since 4.3 sprites have been made pretty much for Unity. So we'll be simulating shadows and lighting with pixel with a whole pixel sprite sheet. Sorry, got my words mixed up. So again, there's the piece that will connect to the ceiling, and that'll pretty much go onto a wall where in the entire hospital area. I just wanted to sharpen the highlight for the linoleum trim. I honestly think it is linoleum. I could be wrong. And what I'm doing now is, even though I've duplicated it, what I actually wanted to do was create a proper ceiling trim. Now, I don't end up using it for this video, but I actually do use it to build the rooms. You'll see it in a sec. What I'm doing is essentially just creating a ceiling trim, kind of like if you look around your house, you might notice a ceiling sort of, I forgot what it's called, but it's kind of like it basically is a trim, and I sort of experimented using bevels. I just wanted to bevel it and see what it would look like. I tried using bevels on the top, bevels on the bottom. I actually cut out a fair bit of video at this point because I was just having a lot of difficulty getting the kind of pattern that I wanted for the ceiling trim. That I just decided to go, well, what you're seeing now is pretty much, I think it's roughly about 15 minutes cut out. Yeah, so that's it's quite a bit of time cut out. And even now that I'm watching it back, I still think I'm taking way too long. But that's the ceiling trim. I don't actually end up using it for this video, but during the level construction part of the video, but I do end up using it. So I'm just constantly cleaning it up, making sure that it looks the way I want it to look. Keep going backspace. I think I was really confused at this point. It's because I wanted to get like a sort of inwards gradient that would eventually come out towards a sort of lip, and then just sort of have the rest of that just sort of fall off into a flat area. That's what I wanted to get, but I don't think I achieved it at all watching this back. So I grouped it together just because I want to have I want to use this as a template. Export it out to a BMP, because if you are going to make a texture later on that uses shadows, which we'll be doing, BMP retains the alpha channel, if I remember correctly. So here I'm essentially just creating prefabs. I've already sliced up the sprite sheet, so I don't need to show you that because I've already shown you how to do that. And what do you know? You got to drag it in one by one. That's 2D for you. So while the 2D functionality in Unity 4.5 is a lot, well, there's a lot more, I don't think it's quite there yet. So what I'm doing now is I'm just pretty much just filling in, replacing all the bits with my new sprite sheet. And you'll notice that if you're noticing any skips in the video, that's because I had to make some quick changes, and I paused it and made the changes that I need to make. So here's where that that thing about modularity and over modularity can come into play. Did you notice just how fewer pieces I used to make the wall? Whereas originally the wall background just was made up of a whole lot of other pieces, whereas now it's only just a few, way fewer than before. And that's what you kind of want to focus on, just making sure that you're using as few pieces as possible and covering as much ground, or in this case as much wall. And I mean, essentially, you want to have less work for yourself, ultimately. This is also where sorting layers comes into becomes really important, because when you're creating your levels, be warned that in Unity, the when you import a sprite, its default is 0. So with Unity sprites, Unity 2D, that is, the lower it is, the lower it'll be rendered. In GameMaker, it's the other way around, so be aware. So essentially, different engines will have different layering orders, but essentially the driving theory is the same. It's all about ensuring that you prioritize which objects will get drawn on top of what. And here I'm just filling in all the spaces with the wall sections, even the areas that you're not allowed to go to, because at the end of the day, you'll still be seeing it. Even though you can't go there, you'll still be seeing it. And you want to be able to sort of move that. You want to be able to sort of tell a background story. So I just essentially just finished building that area, added trims in, and here, this bit I have future plans for. I don't have any of the pieces yet, but essentially for this bit I'll be adding in windows to the scene. And I delete that entire area. Yeah, so if you have any questions about the previous section, just ask, because really I don't think you would have any, considering the fact that we're just really just putting graphics in and it's not really that important. I mean, it is important, but I'm pretty sure you don't need to watch me sort of build a level and fiddle around for that long. At least I'm pretty sure you don't need to see that. So like I said, this is going to have windows later on, and it's going to be vital to the story element. So yeah, it's going to be key to story progression. And essentially what I'm doing is just making sure that that door doesn't have a window behind it. And that's pretty much it. That's that. Yep, all the trims are there. Everything's there. That's it. Okay, so now that we've finished with the video today, with putting at least the starting graphics in, let's quickly cover what we've learned today. So modularity and over modularity. Remember, there's a very fine line between using or creating something that's modular and creating something that's too modular. So if you compare the design kit that I used to the graphics, to the sprite sheet that I actually used in the video today, you'll notice that I actually used far fewer pieces. And that's because I took modularity into account, and I made sure that I designed the pieces in a way that I could use freely and sort of make cuts here and there. And the next, wait, let's check that off. Let's check that off because we covered that. The next thing is sorting layers. Be aware that you don't want to have something important drawn underneath something that isn't so important, like having the player drawn under a wall, a background. So make sure that you use sorting layers, because that's what they're there for. They're there to make sure that everything important is being drawn on top of everything that's not so important. So let's check that off. And that concludes today's video. Next week will be all about, actually it's quite experimental. Next week will be all about creating shadows using a sprite sheet. So I've never actually done this, I've never actually used that particular technique before, but apparently it works really well. So using a sprite sheet to create shadows, and also we'll be adding more graphics, making the scene look a lot prettier. But until next time, please, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and make some really awesome levels. Until next time, however, I'll see you all later. Bye.